Okay, let's get this next batch started. Just want to add a quick note to the beginning of this video. So if you don't already know how to watch videos at a higher speed, 1.5 times speed, 2 times speed, this is the video to learn. If you don't already know how to use the buttons to jump 10 seconds ahead at a time, this might be the video to learn it on. This is going to be a very long video. I thought about cutting it into 2 pieces, but that doesn't make it a shorter video. It just means you have to find the pieces. This video is just about showing the whole process from beginning to end. Anyway, I apologize for how long it is. Hopefully some people will learn something from it and it'll be useful. Otherwise, ignore it and go on to the next one. This next batch is number 585. We'll start getting it set up and then I want to mention a few things. Okay, get the thermometer underneath. Everything's had a chance to dry. This finished last night actually, so it's been drying with the fan on overnight because I wasn't prepared to start this next batch right away. So now I am. I want to show the water. So this is the water from that batch of corn, the last batch, 584. So a full 8 pounds or a little bit more than 8 pounds of water, full gallon or plus a little. This batch is going to be another batch for my sister. Eventually I'm going to just stop doing them for her. Well, actually, because she's going to get her own machine. Until then, we'll still keep doing some of them for her. I realized even as much detail as I've put in, I haven't shown every single little piece. So if I had somebody that was relatively comfortable working around the kitchen, microwave, stove, all those kinds of things, I still probably haven't given the detail needed for every single piece of how I'm doing this. So I'm not suggesting this is what you need to do, but this is what I expect with this machine at this house with the methods as we've been doing to ensure full dryness. So on this batch, I'm going to try to show everything that I do, all the way from here, all the way to here on the next batch, so that it's ready, a complete cycle, every little piece. Washing the trays, turning on the fan, turning off the fan. I'm going to try to show everything. And I'll try to mention the pieces that I'm just doing for the video. There's a lot of the time aspect of this. People say, well, that's really time consuming. You put too much work into it. You're doing it the hard way. A lot of the stuff that I'm doing is specifically to be able to show these things on the video. I don't turn off fans and things like that when I'm not videoing because I do a lot of that for sound issues. I don't do a good job with sound anyway on my videos. It would be worse if I didn't think about turning off some of the things that are running. So I'm going to try to show every little bit of it. So I'm getting this ready for the next batch. The next batch, as I said, is going to be my sister's. It's going to be, I think, mixed vegetables, unless they don't have any mixed vegetables at the store, because I'm even including that on this particular one. We're going to go to the store and get some. They're on sale. The 5-pound bags of mixed vegetables are on sale at Chef's Store. So we're going to go there and get some. So on a regular basis, on each one of them, I check. I give this a little feel. If I feel any film on it, any grit on it, then I'm going to pull it out and clean it. And I've shown that plenty of times. So if we had to do that right now, I could just cut to one of the cleaning videos. Or we could do a cleaning. Everything seems fine, so I'm not going to worry about it on this one. The thermometers that I use, absolutely not required. I have a thermometer underneath that tells me what it's touching the barrel, so it tells me pretty close to what the barrel temperature is. If it hasn't been overnight and it's only been a couple hours or so and it's just barely defrosted, then I will usually take a paper towel or a cloth on the little grabber tool and run it down the sides. Make sure that it doesn't pick anything up, water or dust or debris, and on the shelves. Okay, get all of those. And on top, and I really don't need to do it this time because it's had a full time overnight to defrost and dry. Yeah, so there's zero water, zero anything. If I did find debris, or if it left a film on it, then it would be time to clean it for sure. If I've done raw meat or raw eggs in there, I'm going to pull it out and clean it and disinfect it before I do the next cooked batch, or vegetables or fruits or things, so that I don't cross-contaminate. Now, if I'm doing 2 loads of raw beef in a row, I will probably do that, but I also won't let it defrost a long time. I'll just get it dry and then put the next batch in right away. Okay, so now I'm going to put this disc in place. The disc is not a requirement. They used to put kind of a pillow insulation piece in there, and they stopped doing that. I don't know why, but I suspect it's because now they're using a vacuum cooling process. So after it gets partway cold and cold enough so things are starting to freeze, they can turn on the vacuum pump and help it freeze quicker. Well, once you vacuum this, the disc in there or the pillow in there doesn't matter. For heat transfer, you have conduction, convection, and radiant. So you still have radiant. The hot here is radiating into there. So it still might help, but you could put a piece of cardboard out here on the outside and accomplish that. Plus you have a 3/4 inch thick, or whatever this is, plexiglass, which is going to help. But you don't have any conduction in there or convection because of the air currents in there, because the air is gone. So vacuum's a great insulator. With my machine, I've got the older 2017 machine, and I've kept the old firmware. I like the old firmware. I could have upgraded to something newer. I don't think I can go all the way to the new firmware because the hardware has to support that. But I can upgrade it somewhat. I'm happy with this. I'm here, I'm available for it. It doesn't matter that I run it in manual mode. I could run it in automatic. It would do about the same thing. I just wouldn't get all the information on the screen. Next, we'll make sure that I have a seal. I want to make sure I have a ring all the way around the seal. Again, not necessarily required. If you have some gaps there, but it's really close, you might get a little bit of frost in those spaces that aren't touching, and you'll have air being pulled in, cold air or hot humid air from out here being pulled into there while it's freezing, and it's going to freeze along the edge of that seal where it's not touching. It will still melt very quickly as it pulls a little bit of air in when the vacuum first starts, and then it'll seal down. But it will pull in some room air into there before that happens. It's a small amount, but I just don't feel any reason to give it another chance for something to go wrong. So I use my little icing knife, my icing spatula, and I put it in between the seal and the side of the front of the machine, and just give it a little twist where the seal's not touching. So it's not touching from here to here. So I can put this in there, just give it a little twist. Now it's not touching just from there. Now just this little space. Okay, now I've got a ring all the way around. I don't have to worry about air getting in there now and freezing that seal. And once it gets down to 40 below, the seal is less flexible. Even though it's a silicone, at 40 below, it's still not quite as flexible as it is at room temperature. All right, that's set. Now I'll close the drain valve, so let's go over there. Okay, on this side of the machine, I've got my drain valve, and I've got it going into a 1 gallon milk container down there. And if I have a particularly large water batch, I put the gallon jug into a little bucket to catch any overspill. That's very, very rare. Next, I'll close the drain valve. And then this will be taken care of later. Just leave that sitting there. That will be later. That is my funky oil filtration system, that's actually for the timer motor. And if you've seen that video, you'll know how I actuate that and how that all works. But we'll get back to that. So now that's closed. Now it's time to get it actually running. And then there'll be nothing else to do for a little while that pre-freezes. And this will end up being a little bit of a longer pre-freeze than absolutely required, because I'm going to go to the store and buy the vegetables to put in here. I like to make sure that the machine gets down to at least the same temperature as the freezers, or the food that's coming out of the freezers, before I put the food in here, so it doesn't warm up when I put the food in here. It sounds like from all the comments I see that the new machines don't get it that cold before you are told to put the food in. I'm not going to put frozen food in a warm freeze dryer. The last batch that I ran took 45 hours, 18 minutes, 18 seconds total. So it still has that on the display. It shows the current date, 10/15/22. The time's a little bit off. It's showing about 13 minutes or something, and it's actually like 16, 17 after. I'm running version 2.4.3. It's the one that came with it. I've been real happy with it because of this custom cycle. I don't run it in the automatic, which would just be press start, because then it doesn't show me all the data about what's happening in the machine. When I run it in custom, it essentially works the same way, but it shows me the time, the temperature, the pressure, shows me all the data on the screen at the same time. I don't know if the newest one does or not, but some of the ones in between, this one does not if I run it in regular mode. That's why I run it in custom. Okay, so customize. And at this screen gives me the option to change the temperature of the shelf heaters. I'm not going to change that. I've got it set for 120. I rarely change that. It definitely changes the timing. I mean, if you put it lower, it's going to take much longer to freeze dry. Put it higher, I think it's really good for some of the candies and stuff. Okay, and then if you press the adjust cycle timer or times, then you can adjust the initial freeze time and the final time. The main dry cycle is automatic even in the custom mode. It's going to run for 30 hours or until it senses or believes that it's dry enough. So I'm going to start custom and continue. The drain valve is closed, handy reminder. It's saying that it's 65 degrees in there right now. That temperature probe is on the bottom of the second shelf up, way in the back. The thermometer underneath the barrel right now shows that it's about 70, 71 degrees. So they're a little bit different, but it's close enough. Well, that's pre-cooling. Let's go to Chef Store and get some mixed vegetables to fill up some trays. We're home. Okay. So, good sale on those. Get 2 of them for today's freeze drying. Get some corn for either freeze drying or snacking on. And another one of these for future freeze drying. I'm back. It's 2¼ hours later, because that's how long it took to go to the Chef Store and back, because you have to go around the store to find out if there's deals. We bought more than just what we went there for, because there were some deals, including double chocolate chip cookie dough. Anyway, it's very cold now. It's about almost 40 below already. And one of the things with the old machine, you can just simply leave it running and it just keeps staying cold. It's like a freezer, a small desktop size freezer. So it just gets very cold and stays very cold. The surrounding temperatures, of course, will influence how cold it gets, but when it's cold down here, it can easily get 50 to 60 below zero according to the display. The thermometer underneath only goes to 40 below, and I've seen it considerably below that 40 below mark. We'll get the food on the trays and then go through the next steps for getting this set up and running. And as usual, I'm using stuff that's been pre-frozen. In this case, it's mixed vegetables from Chef's Store. So after I got them, I put them in here while I waited to get everything set up. So I've got the trays pre-chilled, and that's not a requirement. You don't have to pre-chill them, but I'm going to put frozen food on it. Why should I have them warm? And then the bags of mixed vegetables. I'm just setting them on my rolling cart to move them over to the bagging table, which is the same table I use for putting them on the trays. Tray 1. This step is not necessary or required for freeze drying. I do this because a lot of people have asked many times, how much did it weigh before you freeze dried it? How much did it weigh after you freeze dried it? So I started weighing things so that I would know and I'd be able to share that information. I do weigh things like stew and soups, sauces, that I want to get the same amount of weight of water in afterwards. For vegetables, it will just absorb what it needs, so I usually don't worry about it. A lot of other things I don't worry about either, because I can just put in a little at a time. So for this tray, I need to go to about 1890-ish for the 2.5 pounds. Okay, close enough, 1891. And I'm going to add a thermometer in there so I can know what's happening in the freeze dryer. And tray 2, and that one's 1907. We'll get a shot of this bag. This is Garden Fresh brand. I've been real happy with these so far. I could add that information. Okay. Going to add a thermometer in this one also. This one needs to get to about 1876 to get up to the 2.5 pounds. Yeehaw! 1879. And this one will get the rest of it. 1902. And add a thermometer in there. The vegetables are on the trays and ready to put into the freeze dryer. You can see that if you're just pouring them on there and not worrying about weight, you could pour them on there in seconds. You could simply lay out all 4 trays, pour on the vegetables, level them to kind of close, and then put them in there. I spend more time weighing them and checking them and making the video portion of it than the actual freeze drying of it. People say, well, it takes a long time to do it the way you're doing it. Yes, it does, because I'm trying to show each step so that it's clear and understandable. You'll find that in reality, it takes a lot less time to do it than it does to show it or explain doing it. Now, let's go get them in the freeze dryer. Get this open, and right now it is sealed against there, so I have to pull it open I could open the drain valve and let a little bit of air in there, but it's not that much of a vacuum at this point. It's only a few pounds, probably about 5 pounds, 10 pounds, probably closer to 10 pounds. So it's not a huge amount of pressure at this point. So I'll get the trays in there, and I put them in the same order each time just for convenience and consistency. It doesn't matter how you put them in there. Just get them chucked in there real quick and get it resealed. The thermometers in the trays food shows about 10 degrees on each tray. Okay. And I want to make sure I get that seal again, so I'm kind of pushing on the door just a little bit, and that way as the air contracts, the warm air that just rushed in there, it's going to cool and contract and cause a little bit of a vacuum again. So by pushing on it gently, it was able to get that seal as it contracted. Now I have a good ring around there again. So that's ready to go. So the next non-required thing, sometimes to make sure that that vacuum's really good, I suck a little air out of the chamber. I'll show. So this is the drain hose coming out of the machine. And so I'm going to suck a little bit of air out of there. You could put a vacuum pump on there. You could have a second vacuum pump. You could turn on the vacuum pump, but then I'd have to unplug it from the back of the machine, plug it into a different outlet, and then run it for a bit. But I want to pull a little bit more of a vacuum in there so that I know that it stays closed. So all I did was suck some air out of it, and then I turned on the valve as I'm sucking on it, and then turned it back off. That gives me a little bit better of a ring. Totally not required. Okay, there, you can see the ring, and it's a pretty good width already, and that goes all the way around, and so I know that it's not going to be leaking any air. Here it is down along the bottom. Okay. We've got a good seal ring completely around there now. Everything's looking good. It's ready to go. It has 3.5 hours more on the timer before it's going to start the dry cycle, the main dry cycle. I have it set, because I always do custom batches, I have it set for a 6-hour freeze time and an 11-hour final dry time. The machine's firmware sets it for a 30-hour main dry time, or a main dry cycle. When it senses that it's dry enough, it will skip the rest of that 30 hours and go to the final dry. For a lot of foods, that's good enough. It's accurate enough to give a pretty accurate drying information, but definitely not for everything. I could definitely fool it with a lot of foods. The newer machines are better. The software or firmware is better, and they're more accurate. But I will never trust the machine to tell me that it's finished unless it has some kind of weight sensor or automatic available water meter built into it. I wouldn't trust it. A good available water meter for food industries is going to be $2,000–3,000 easily, and it's still going to be spot checking it. You're still going to have a small sample of the total. That's not good enough for me and long-term storage. I'm not going to do it that way. As I've shown in some other videos, such as the minute rice, the dry hash brown potatoes, and some other ones, that even though it seems to be dry, it's not dry. There's still moisture in there, easily pulled out. I'm not going to bag it with 5 or 10% moisture by weight. Not if it's easy to pull it out and easy to check. All I have to do is weigh it, put it back in there for additional time, take it back out and reweigh it, and I'm checking the entire load. I'm not just spot checking. If you look at your biggest pieces and break them open and feel them, you might get every piece, but the piece that has moisture in it might not be the biggest piece. It might be the piece on the corner of the tray. As this thing operates, the trays warp a little bit with heat. The corners go up. You can really see that with the candies. The fact that the ones toward the center of the tray puff up first. The ones in the corners tend to puff up later. Occasionally they don't work at all on the corners. It does not get the same heat everywhere. It's pretty good, but I'm not going to trust it for my food supply 10 years out to go, but the machine said it was done. And I certainly can't feel the moisture in it. I don't think anybody can feel the moisture in it. Again, going back to the minute rice or dry hash brown potatoes, they feel dry before I put them in there. They weren't dry. So I'm going to watch the time and temperature to make sure that it's cold enough. Right now there's a bit of frost on that inside shield, but that's going to dissipate over the next hour or less, and I'll be able to see the thermometers clearly in there. In just those couple of minutes, they've already dropped another 5 degrees. I want to make sure that the barrel is cold so that when the water sublimates out of the food, it's got a cold surface to desublimate onto, because of course all that water is going to transfer out of the food and onto the chamber walls. That's where the water goes. Some of it ends up going out the vacuum hose, and that's something we're trying to prevent. If you don't properly cool this, all of that moisture is going to go out the vacuum hose because it has nowhere else to go. So I want to make sure that the chamber is cold before I get started, or before I let it go to the freeze cycle. So it's showing 3 hours and about 20 minutes left. I'll come and check it before that time is up to make sure it's cold enough. If it's not cold enough, and by cold enough, the bottom thermometer should be at below -40, and I want the thermometers in the foods to be at least down to -20, and I'd love to have them even lower. If I'm doing things like orange juice, ice cream, blueberries, pineapple, I won't start the main dry cycle until it's 30 or 40 below zero to help make sure that they work well. If there are any liquidy spots in ice cream, it's going to blow up. Okay, do we have anything else right now that needs to be taken care of? If I'm walking away from it right now, and I'm going to, I'm assuming I'm going to come back in about 3 hours or less and double check the temperatures. But just in case I don't, I'll turn on the cooling fan that blows air across the vacuum pump and motor and kind of blows it away from this area, kind of swirls around and out of here. But anyway, that helps keep this cooler. Most electric motors and pumps and things work better long term. They last longer if you don't overheat them. I'm assuming that's true with this too. I know it's made for higher temperatures, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to keep it cool. Unless I see the data saying that this electric motor loves to be overheated, I'm not going to let it overheat. This fan that goes through this and pulls air across these fins is much better than the original old style vacuum pump that was here. It's really quite nice. And when my sister gets hers will be even the newer one. So that'll be a really interesting thing. I'd love to see how that works. And it's one I might even upgrade to someday if this one dies. With the cooling fan on, the other thing I would look at is starting the oil filtration pump. I have it on a timer, and you can see that on other videos. And I just plug in that timer piece because it's not really a timer. It's a motor from a different project that I'm using to start and stop, to turn on and off a switch for the actual filtration pump. So we'll turn that on later because that doesn't have to be running at all, because you don't have to have that. We have clean oil in there because of the filtration system. So if I don't get that turned on, it's not going to hurt anything. If I do turn it on, which I almost always do, then I just continually have a new supply of clean oil going through there. I'm using this version of the vacuum pump right now, and it has a ballast valve on it. And I've been experimenting with that the last few batches because my sister has hers now and it has the ballast that's always open. So I've turned this on, and if you notice, the oil is shiny clean. Usually with these kinds of older pumps, in a batch or two, this would be quite cloudy. Well, by running it with the ballast open, it's been half a dozen batches and it's beautiful still. So the ballast on this seems to work like the new one does. So I'm pretty happy with that. I've been opening the ballast and you can hear the difference, and you can see the power meter. It goes up about 30 to 50 watts when it's running, and you open that and you can hear kind of a gurgle sound. And I open it just enough to barely hear that, and it keeps it clean as can be. So I'll keep experimenting with that, and I'll try to show that one. I'll come back anytime we do any additional steps. I'm going to try to show every minute of this batch as far as what I'm doing. And you can see most of it is spent yakking and doing the video parts. It's down to just a half hour left of the freezing before it switches to the main dry cycle. And if you were in automatic mode, it would be doing the same thing. But because it took me so long to get them in, because I went to the store after I started it, it didn't have the full freeze time with the food in there. It's showing only -30 right now for the barrel, and I want it to be -40 before I start. The thermometer that I put underneath is showing about -40, so it's probably cold enough, because that means the barrel is probably -40 or colder. But I'm going to go ahead and add another half hour to this. So I'm just doing the up arrow twice, or I'm going to add a full hour. I think I said a half hour. So now I've got an hour and a half to go before it's going to start. That'll give it a little more freeze time. Okay, I think that's it. Again, a lot of these things are specific to my machine and our circumstance. The fact that I've added a continuous flow oil filter system, that's not normal for a machine. It's not required. Just that if I didn't have it, I would want to change the oil about 3 or 4 times every batch. The way I have it, I'm changing it hundreds of times every batch. It's going through the filter and coming back clean. So with that in mind, the next thing I do, since this has got less than an hour and a half to go, and I might not check it again for a day or two, I'm going to plug in the oil filter timer circuit. So I've got this little plug. That'll get plugged in there. And now the timer piece is running. That's what that little piece is running. It's just running this motor that was, well, this is the motor, and then it's geared down. Anyway, this is from another project that I had in the past, which I didn't need anymore. So I just 3D printed this little cam, put a switch against it, and that turns on and off the oil pump, which runs it through the filters. I'm back with batch 585, so continuing on trying to show every detail so somebody else can take over this process if I can't for whatever reason. It's been about 46 hours total since I first started it for pre-cooling. So the main dry cycle was finished about 11 hours ago, then it went to the final dry, and that's almost finished. So for yesterday, the only thing I did with freeze drying at all was I gave the pump a little shake, and I'll show that now. So the vacuum pump, I have the oil filtering system, so this tube goes down to the oil filtering system, which is on a different video, and that's easy to find. The outlet for the pump, so even when you drain it, if you didn't have this system, the outlet is not at the lowest part of the pump. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a sump or a well at the bottom where this is connected. So you're going to end up with water droplets staying inside there. So what I've been doing is every so often when I happen to think about it and go by, so I think twice yesterday when I was down here for other reasons, while the pump is running and it's about to, let's see, it started running right now, then I just give it a little jiggle at the front end there, and then some of the water droplets are going out. So while it's running, I just give it a little bit of a jiggle, and that stirs up the water droplets, and because I'm shaking at the front, I'm assuming, since the water droplets are heavier, they're going to move down toward here a little bit. And I do have a teeny piece of foam under the back feet of this to give it just a teeny tilt, but I'm not sure how important it is to keep it level because of the vacuum pump mechanism, so I don't tip it a long ways. If I knew it was safe to tip it at 20 degrees or something, I probably would. That would give it more That would give it more chance for the little water droplets to get out. Anyway, and these are, well, maybe it's not obvious. I was going to say these are obviously the wrong kinds of tubing. This is a vinyl tubing, and putting oil through it, it's not a good match. So these get hard and crunchy, and I have to replace them once or twice a year. I really should be using an oil type hose, but then they're not clear. The ones I've seen aren't clear, and then I can't see the water droplets going through. So that's why I just keep using these and just keep changing them out. Now, so as I said, I gave that a shake a couple of times yesterday. It doesn't necessarily need it, but I like to get those water droplets out of there. I think it's not really damaging to the oil or anything because they are droplets now. They're not suspended in the oil. So any water that's in there at that point are droplets sitting on the bottom. So I still want to get them out of there eventually, so I just do it while the oil cleaner pump is running. But it's not even required to have that system at all. I just want to get rid of as much water real time as I can. Now we'll bypass the rest of that time and continue with the process. So bypass the rest of that using the down arrow, and of course you could just wait until it finishes and not do this. Now we'll go open the drain valve. I always have my hose of the drain just sitting at the very top of a jug, and then we'll open the drain valve. Okay. And as you can hear, it only takes a few seconds for the air to get back in. And now I'm going to weigh the trays. The reason I'm weighing them is to find out what the weight is right now. So tray 1. It's a simple way to check to make sure they've stopped losing weight. So right now this weighs 974 grams. So I'll just note that. And we used to just do it on a scrap paper because we don't need that number. I just want it so I don't need it later. I just need it right now so I can compare it to 2 hours from now. So this tray is 980 grams. And I'll put this one back in, up higher. So I'm going to put tray 2 up on the top shelf. And tray 1 down here. And I'm switching these two because there might be a difference in warmth on those two positions. So I'm just evening them out. So tray 3, 965. And tray 4, 975. Okay, now these will go back in also. Tray 4 will go up 1, and tray 3 will come down 1. The point of the thermometers in the food is if the machine had already stopped before I came back to it, I would have known what the temperature of the food on the trays was. If it's below 70 or 80, I don't like to take it out. 70 or 80 is not a big problem, but I draw the line there because there might be colder spots around the metal of the tray that I can't see yet. So if it's below that temperature, I re-warm it before I take it out to make sure that there's no cold spots on the tray that are going to condense moisture out of the air out here when I open it. So that's the point of the thermometers. They're not required. You don't have to have thermometers in there to do this process or to do freeze drying. I just like it so that I know the temperature of the food before I take it out. Then I only have to re-warm it if I know that it's necessary or feel that it's necessary. Next we'll go close the drain valve again. Okay, so close the drain valve. And now we're going to give it more time, and this portion right here is what I call my dry check. I'm taking it out to weigh it. Now I've got a base weight. I know what they weigh right now. Now I can give it more dry time. I can give it additional dry time and then compare those two numbers. If it goes down, that means water's still coming out and they're not dry right now. If it doesn't change, then it's dry now, and I can use the time that I have right there, which is about 46 hours, for how long did it take to dry. And on later batches, it'll give me some information as to how long it might take for a particular food for a particular amount, loaded that way with these temperatures. There's so many variables. I've had comments saying, why not just add additional time? I still won't know if it was dry or not. I could add 10 more hours. How would I know that it was dry? Now, if I'm doing many batches of the same thing consecutively, so they're same source of the food, the same loading of the food, the same volumes, all of those issues, then I might trust it, maybe give it an extra 10% of the time. Time is money in electricity, so if I gave it an extra 10 hours every time, well, that might be wasting 8 of those hours every time. So with this, in 2 hours, I'll know whether or not it was dry. That's the reason I do the dry check. And the newer machines and the newer software or firmware does seem to be more accurate. But I still wouldn't trust it. You'll find no commercial place that doesn't do a check to make sure that their product is done or up to temperature or down to temperature or whatever variable they're looking for. You're going to check it. You're going to have a process to make sure that you have finished the whatever process you're trying to do. So even if I had an expensive available water meter, I would still do this way, because any of the other checking type things, any of the other sampling type methods are going to take a small portion of the whole and check that. What if you get the wrong spot? If you watch these trays, especially on the time lapse, as it heats and it's drying, you'll see the trays flex up and down. The corners and the edges are not in contact with the heater tray, the heater bed, as much as the center is. They don't dry evenly. So even if you have the thickest piece in it and it's in the center and you check it and it's dry, that doesn't tell you that the corners are dry yet. It tells you that that piece was dry. And I don't think that, well, I know my hands can't touch food and tell you what the percentage of moisture left in there is. When we did the batch with the dry rice and the dry pre-dried hash brown potatoes, they still had 7–10% of water in them when they were dry, when we bought them as a dry product. So I don't think you can feel whether or not they're dry. So I'll do a dry check method. Okay, now let's add more time. I'm going to restart it using more dry time button, and we already closed the drain valve, and continue. On this system, it gives an hour for the vacuum pump to cool before restarting, but with the fan on there, it's already cool. And then I'll add an additional 15 minutes because the heaters for the final dry turn off during the last 15 minutes. So this gives me my full 2 hours. And for those occasions that I know I can't be back in time, I'll just give it additional time right up front. But I can always add time or subtract time anytime I go past the machine, so it is changeable. So we'll be back in about 2 hours. Don't go away. I'm back, and it's just a little over 2 hours later, about 2 hours and 9 minutes. So it's in the last few minutes of the final dry cycle, which means the heaters are already off. So I'm going to get them out and get them weighed to make sure that they stop losing weight. If there's no weight loss on the trays, that means they were done 2 hours ago, and I can use that time for how long it takes to dry them. The current temperatures on the trays are 100, 120, 120, and 110. But again, the heaters have been off for 9 minutes now, and it'll start to cool pretty quickly, and especially that bottom one next to the ice down there. So let's get them out and check them. So I'll use the down arrow to bypass that last couple of minutes. Yeehaw! Okay, I'll open the drain valve. And now with the pressure equalized, we can open the door. When it's under vacuum, it can't open the door because it's being pushed in with 15 pounds per square inch approximately. It's a lot of pressure on that door. Okay, tray 1. 974, so that's the same weight. So 2 hours. Tray 2, 980, no change. Tray 3, 965, no change. So that tells us they were actually dry sometime before it finished the first time. And 975. Now we know they're dry. I'm going to stop the machine using the no defrost button. And then I'm going to turn off the fan that cools the vacuum pump. I'm going to unplug the timer piece for the vacuum pump filter. Going to pull the thermometer out from underneath. And if you don't have a thermometer, don't worry, it's not needed, it's not required. I just like all the information. I'm going to see if I can show that. There's a pretty good ice buildup in there. And as it melts, sometimes it'll fill up to here and it could go over this way if it doesn't drain out the back first. So right here is a band of ice along the bottom. So on my machine, it always has this band of ice right here. Sometimes it's so high that I have to worry about that from the top of that band of ice to the front, it's actually downhill. So if it melts a certain way, it'll fill up this space here and it'll come out the front. One thing I've found to prevent that is I have this piece of aluminum angle and I can set it on that piece of ice. Okay, and I've got another one. So by putting this in there, it will actually melt a V into that piece of ice and it'll drain there first. So that's all I have to do about that. And then after about 15-20 minutes, I can just pull this out because there will be a V melted into that piece of ice. Okay, going to put my little defrost baffle in place and the fan into place. And I'm just clipping it on the door. There's so many ways you could accomplish this. You could have a board sitting on top and have a fan hanging on it. You could have some kind of gooseneck thing and have a fan on it. You could do it anyway. Or you could even use the defrost cycle. I don't use the defrost cycle. Now let's get the time and the power usage. So it's showing 48.5 hours, but we know that I added 15 extra minutes and it had 15 earlier while we were checking the weight. So I'm going to back that up to 46 hours that it was dry. And it was probably dry before that because it lost no weight. So we know it was dry before that. We just don't know exactly when. So I'm going to put 46 as the time. And if you're not tracking this stuff for a charting or video, you can ignore all this information. It doesn't matter. It's just people ask, so I'm trying to record it. The power usage for that batch of mixed vegetables was 31.66 kilowatt hours. I'll reset that so it'll be ready for the next one. And then that's showing the power usage for the electronics right now. It uses about 3.5 watts when it's just sitting there waiting. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and turn this on while we go over and bag it. If it's too loud, I'll turn it off while I bag just for video reasons. Otherwise, I would just leave this running until I'm ready for the next batch. Even if it's defrosted, all the water's gone, I still leave this running on low with the door open. I don't close the door unless I'm cooling it for a batch. Otherwise, the door is always open so I can help prevent any opportunity for molds or mildews inside. I want it dry. Okay, it's only been a couple of minutes, but that's getting pretty good already. It's got about a 1/4 inch groove in it so far. Get the thermometers out and get the weights. So 966, 972, 957, 967. And since this is going to take a little while to bag and for scooping, because these are my sister's, and she likes hers just scooped by volume into bags, I'm going to put all of these into a big zipper bag until I can bag them. And I like to do this bag method anytime that I can't bag them immediately. So if it's going to be a half hour, I like to put them in a bag. If it's going to be 15 minutes, I like to put them in a bag. I do not like water getting into my food. This kind of plastic is not anywhere near as good as a Mylar bag, but it's certainly better than open trays. I'll get the final weights and we'll be right back. And for this particular batch, the weights don't matter, and it might not matter to you ever. This is another piece of information that's not required to know for freeze drying. I'm doing this because people ask, and I'm kind of an information person. I hate to have information available to me that I ignore. So I've got my little worksheet here. Have the start date, so the time that it went, or the date that it went into the freeze dryer, the batch number and what it is. And then I've got the total weight of the tray and food, and then the weight of the trays. And I subtract that, I get the net weight. So the total before it was freeze dried was 4,604 grams. And then this is the weight check, which has no value whatsoever except to check to see if it stopped losing weight. So that I don't use for anything. I could use a piece of scratch paper. In fact, most of the time we used a piece of scratch paper until we started doing the 50 batch series and people wanted to know the information. And then this is the weight after it was freeze dried, the total gross weight with the tray and the food. And then I subtract out the tray again and get just the net weight. So with the net weight was only 887 grams after it was freeze dried. So it lost 3,717 grams of water. Okay, and then so per pound, now it's only 88.7 grams of this dry mix for each pound, and each pound of it would need 371 grams of water put back in. Anyway, for my sister, she never worries about that. She just covers it with hot water, lets it rehydrate, then drains it out. I've got bags labeled. I'm bagging these into pint bags for her. So it's got the batch number written in felt pen in case this label gets ripped off. And then I can go back to the notebook and still know what it is. Or if you have other bags in the same bin that have that same number, you can look at those and know what it is. So then on the tag I have the batch number, what it is, the date it went in, and then a space for the amount before drying and the amount of water needed. She ignores the amount of water needed, and for this she just uses a volume. So this will say 12 ounces or a cup and a half, whichever she prefers. Okay, now we can start bagging this. So I'm going to take a scoop of this and just kind of fill it up to level and then pour it into the bags. Okay, and that's all there is to it. And I'll just go ahead and do all the bags real quick. And if I want to make sure that they're very even, I could put them on a scale and kind of even them out. I've got all the mixed vegetables bagged into 1 pint bags. Now time to get oxygen absorbers in. I'm going to use the 300cc oxygen absorbers, even though that's bigger than absolutely necessary for this size bag. For the most part, I try to keep the 1 oxygen absorber size that fits most of the bags I use. So this one will work for the pints and quart bags that I use the most. So I'm going to tuck an oxygen absorber down the side, alongside there, so it's out of the way of the zipper or seal. And then I'm just moving them over a little bit so that I know which ones I've done, and I've got less of a chance to mess up and forget one. Or double up on one, and that won't hurt anything. It'll just cost extra money needlessly. Okay, and then as soon as I get those in there, I'll try to get them zippered shut. The zippering, of course, is not a substitute for the heat sealing, but I want to get them zippered as quick as possible after I get the oxygen absorber in, because it's better than leaving the bag open. It will slow down it pulling in more air and oxygen as it starts to absorb the oxygen that it can. Now we'll get these all heat sealed. I'm using the Impact brand impulse sealer. It's what they were sending out with the Harvest Right freeze dryers 5 years ago when I got mine. And I'm going to do the first time twice to make sure it's completely up to temperature. Okay, nice seal across the top, real high up on the bag with space for 2 or 3 more times if that one fails. Or if I do a bad job, or if it has a wrinkle or something like that. So I mentioned in a previous video that this is my second sealer because I accidentally pushed the first one off the cart here and it hit the concrete and didn't survive exactly. Okay. Now, last thing that we do before we put them in bins for storage, I write the gross weight on each bag. So 82 grams, and I'll write that on the bag. That way, if it starts to get heavier, I'll know that moisture is getting through that bag. All of the bags that we use are permeable to oxygen and moisture. It's just a matter of how fast. We're trying to get the best bags that we can so it has the least transmission through there as possible. As soon as these are all marked, then we'll move over and take care of them as far as putting them in a bin. So this set of mixed vegetables for my sister is done. She's not here right now. They won't all fit in this bin, and I know she records where she puts them. She puts them in these little bins so it's easier to take home. I'm going to just put these bags on top of the bin, and then she can take care of them later. So that's all that we're going to do with this set. So one other thing I do for each batch, we'll go back over to the bagging table and finish up with that. So the last thing, we'll get ready for the next batch. We'll wipe this table down. We'll wipe the other table down, the cart that I move the food with, and I'll take the trays up and wash them and get them dried, and then I'll get them pre-freezing in the freezer along with the food for the next batch, all while the freeze dryer is defrosting. By the time it's defrosted, the trays are cold and everything's ready to go again. So after the batches, I like to take them up to the kitchen and wash them with hot soapy water. And if I've done raw meats or raw eggs, then I will even disinfect them. Also, I'll wash the thermometers, and I try not to get the heads of them wet. I don't know if they're waterproof or not, so I hold them kind of like this and just wash everything from here down. And if I'm doing multiple batches of vegetables or non-sticky fruits, things like that, I'll just go ahead and run batch after batch, and after the end of each batch just wipe it clean, because I've got the parchment paper on it, and that does a pretty good job of keeping anything off. And if they're just veggies, it's not like anything sticks to it anyway, so I don't worry about necessarily washing them down every time. And if I've got lots of times, sometimes I'll even just run them through the dishwasher because I'm lazy. We'll get those washed, and then I'll dry them well, and then get them in the freezer to chill along with the food until the freeze dryer is ready. And when it's ready, simply repeat the process over and over again. This next batch is going to be 585. Let me check. Did I put this on right? Oh, crap. Well, hopefully that's still okay. I forgot to put this on. And there's one of the things I have a problem with on these videos, is forgetting about the audio or pressing record on the video. So hopefully that's still good enough. I can boost the sound. How about now?